Hi, everybody. Nice to see you today. Welcome to this conference, e-conference. Let me introduce myself. I'm Bénédicte Ferret-Avignon, co-founder of the Society and Organizations Institute and of the Inclusive Economy Center. So the Inclusive Economy Center is a social pillar of the SNO Institute, and it has been created recently in the continuity of the social business chair that we created in 2008. And the objective of this center is to study and contribute to create new ways, help companies, create new ways to improve their social impact, contribute to the fight against poverty, and co-create together a more inclusive economy. Very ambitious goal. So again, welcome to this conference, which is on a very important topic, a bit technical, but very important, which is ESG and extra financial reporting. So there is a very strategic issue today for investors and companies, which is the standardization of non-financial reporting criteria, and how these new criteria are shaping, in a way, the ESG commitment of companies. And here we'll focus on the European initiative and the new directive that Europe is currently defining to standardize sustainability reporting. So let me introduce now Marieke Huysentruyt. She is a professor in strategy at HEC, and she's academic director of the Inclusive Economy Center. And she has participated this last month to the work of EU in defining these criteria, focusing mostly on social workforce. So she will give us the broad overview of the new directive, and also give a specific focus on her work on social workforce. Thank you so much again for joining us. I leave the floor to Marieke.
Okay, thank you, Bénédicte. Thank you all for being here on a lunch break. Let me quickly share my screen. Does that work? Do you see my screen? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So what I have planned for you is to give you a little bit of an overview of what is this directive about, and then to zoom in on, as Bénédicte said, the work I've done. So kind of behind the screens, how do we actually go about elaborating standards, and then maybe conclude more, taking a step back on what are our expectations. And I hope we'll have some time left also to discuss. Okay, so let me kind of point out that one thing that is quite remarkable is that these sustainability reporting standards are set to become enshrined in EU law. So this is kind of revolutionary almost, and in the sense that these are going to be standards that are really will oblige companies to report along a number of sustainability topics. The timeline, let me take you a little bit through the timeline, which is incredibly ambitious. So maybe some of you will recall that about a year ago, European Commission submitted its proposal of a CSRD. So this world is full of abbreviations. So CSRD, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, to the European Council and Parliament. Okay, and so there was a kind of euphoria. This also coincided with the European Green Deal, the Green Pact. So there was kind of, wow, this thing's going to happen. Things are going to change in a number of directions. So the idea was, okay, we want to develop a directive that will replace the Non-Financial Reporting Directive that is currently in active, and we would like to improve on it in a number of directions. First of all, this new directive will apply to many more companies than the companies currently affected by the current directive. So more companies companies, so the threshold in terms of the size has gone down. So now as soon as companies have over 250 employees and they have a certain turnover, they will be expected, they will be obliged to report according to the reporting requirements that are elaborated by the EU. The reported information will also have to be audited. Okay, that will be mandatory, and companies will be required to digitally tag the information. So I know quite a few of us are researchers in this crowd, so there will be like lots of data coming out that will be hugely interesting to consider. So that's basically what we set out to do a year ago. Then there was this kind of this timeline, as I said, is ambitious because the idea is that starting from January 2024, companies would start reporting, applying the standards as the ones as we have developed. Of course, before they are required to do this, there needs to be a change in law. Okay, and the idea would be that there will be an adoption of the final CSRD by the European Council quite soon, and that following this, there will be a transposition by each member state to actually implement the legal framework. Now, all of this sounded really cool. Then I was like, who is going to develop all these standards? And Patrick de Cambourg was the captain who mobilized lots of different experts to work together on elaborating those standards. And I guess at the time, this was a year ago, I didn't quite understand what I was getting into, but basically there was a whole team of experts mobilized to actually elaborate these standards. And so that's been quite, I'll tell you more about this, but so basically there's lots of people working on the elaboration, and that work has been handed over to EFRAG's new sustainability reporting pillar. So basically now this is kind of out of our hands. It's actually in your hands, because now there is a public consultation. And so this is the moment for you to kind of give feedback, push back, ask us to change things that are being drafted and have been proposed so far. So please go online on the EFRAG website. You will actually see those drafts. And there's many, so you'll need a lot of time to work yourself through this. But your input is hugely welcome. So hopefully we'll get through this and we'll be able to actually have the first set of standards submitted to the Commission summer. Well, the consultation ends the 8th of August. So summer 2022, that's going to be tight, but at least maybe early September, we will be able to submit those standards. There's going to be 2 sets of standards. Okay, so the first set of standards are really the sector agnostic standards. So they will apply to any company. And those are the ones, by the way, that will be applied if all goes well, starting January 2024. And there will be a second set of standards being elaborated, which will be sector specific standards. Okay. And then there's a sort of third level of work, which is really the adoption of these standards by the Commission via delegated acts. So the idea is that there will be a first set of standards adopted around October, and then a second set of standards adopted 1 year later. Okay, so lots of dates, but actually this is all pretty tight. We've been sort of always having to chase the time. Now, luckily,
Marieke, sorry, there are already questions. Should we wait, or do you want to answer the questions already?
Sorry, I don't see the questions. So
I can tell you the question. So, how will reporting be impacted by EU taxonomy in declaring sustainable activities?
Oh, the EU taxonomy. Okay. Yeah. So actually, I'll talk about this in a minute. So taxonomy is clearly like something that was being developed in parallel, but these documents speak to each other. They're being developed for different purposes, but certainly on the glossary, there's been a concerted effort to align. But I'll come back to that. Maybe just sort of, luckily when we started our work in June of last year, we didn't start from scratch. Actually, the EFRAG had actually published a non-technical report, which was like over 230 pages, and it's actually quite visionary. Actually, we use it a lot when elaborating our standards. And a lot of it is actually what is being proposed today is actually aligned with what was suggested back in February 2021. So you can see this idea of a 3-3-3 architecture, meaning that we have 3 layers of standards: sector agnostic, sector specific, and entity specific. That's the first 3. The second 3 is about reporting areas, so about strategy, implementation, and performance metrics. And then the 3 topics: environment, social, and governance. Actually, yeah, all of this holds, except, so the social is kind of interesting, and I'll obviously talk about this more, but it's quite ambitious. So social here means really what is the impact of a company on the whole value chain of the company, so its whole ecosystem. So you'll see that actually that's not just about what is the company's impact on its labor force, but also on value chain workers, affected communities, consumers, end users, and the wider society. So you'll see this later, but it's I just wanted to highlight this, as this is kind of our personal favorite, as this is the area where I've been working on. Maybe just one thing that you won't really find in the current drafts is that we talk about a cross-cutting approach. So the word strategy is actually now it's not one area if you wish. There is a section in the current proposed standard, which is called cross-cutting approach, where companies are asked to reflect not just on their strategy, but also on the materiality of risks and opportunities and support. But for the rest, actually, all of this is quite, we've kind of stuck to what was suggested to us. Again, this comes from that initial proposal where we see these different subtopics in the environmental sphere, social, and governance. And so all of that mapped into clusters. So I've been assigned to cluster 4, but as you can see, there's many clusters working in parallel to develop standards related to these different topics. Okay. Right. So maybe just one thing to highlight are these principles that we are using to guide our work. So when it comes to information quality, these are the sort of criteria that we are using to decide whether it makes sense to ask for a piece of information. So its relevance, whether it's a faithful representation of the concept that we're actually interested in, its comparability, verifiability, and understandability. Okay, these are kind of quite straightforward criteria, at least in theory. In practice, they may be more difficult to evaluate. The second important principle is that of double materiality. So that's actually one that is quite exciting, because it actually means that now we are asking companies to report not only on information about how societal challenges affect their economic growth or economic value or financial value, but we're also asking companies to reflect on how they, through their own activities, affect societal issues. So it's kind of going in the 2 directions, not just financial materiality, but also impact materiality. Okay, and so when we were deliberating about which criteria to include, which disclosure requirements to include, the question was, does this actually is this consistent with the notion of impact materiality? Is it consistent with financial materiality, or both? Okay, so basically it's the kind of union of these considerations that led us to our arbitrage between different requirements. And for what is perhaps no, because I can sense I don't see you all, but for those of you who are coming from the kind of business community, I know many of you are nervous about will we be able to actually deliver the information that is being required. But there is always this kind of clause that is foreseen where you can rebuttal. So basically, all of the sector agnostic criteria, they are designed to actually be mandatory. So they are designed because they reflect that double materiality. But companies still have this opportunity to say, well, actually, we don't think we can actually deliver that piece of information for a particular reason. So there's that rebuttal that can be that may be a kind of way out if for companies who feel very overwhelmed. But of course, they will have to argue why that is not material to them. Okay. Then in terms of the reporting boundaries, so the idea is really to stick to how companies currently produce their financial statements. So we will use those same reporting boundaries complemented, of course, by information about upstream and downstream value in the upstream and downstream in the value chain. And so just kind of highlighting here, that also means that actually it's not just the companies that will have to report, but somehow all the actors in their value chain will also have to report certain pieces of information. So there is a clear knock-on effect. So what you need to understand is that starting in January, about 50,000 companies will be asked to report on this, but many more companies in their value chain will also have to change their reporting procedures, because they will need to produce information that those companies will be required to report. Okay, and then the time horizon, again, the time horizon is meant to be consistent with what the time horizon that undertakings use to in their financial statements. Okay, and again, that time horizon will be expanded upon, because we also want companies to provide forward-looking information. So we want them to kind of foresee, estimate what are the risks, how will the risks change over time, and how does that actually affect their actions, policies, programs, etc. So there's also a kind of forward-looking and retrospective element to these disclosures. Okay. I don't see all of you, so I don't know if there's any questions at this point. Does anyone want to ask a question? Is it clear? Are you guys clear with what I said? Yeah. Okay. All right. So then let me tell you a little bit about the cluster 4. So this is the team. So you'll see there's secretariat members, and there was also certain actors like GRI, Shift, who were involved in the co-construction. So there's kind of a core set of people who were writing up and rewriting standards, and then there was a lot of input coming from outside as well. The process is the following. We started with a number of important documents like the European Pillar of Social Rights, all kinds of human rights instruments, European legislation, as a first basis to understand what do we actually need to capture. So the idea is really to capture information that reflects those visions, those ideas, those principles, those rights, as they are enshrined in these different documents. That led us to identify a series of subtopics, and from there, once we had identified the subtopics and basically allocated people's into different subgroups, we spent a lot of time looking at what the existing frameworks out there. So there was actually a big spreadsheet that was developed by Audencia, researchers at the Audencia University. That was an important input to us, because it was trying to sort of aggregate up a lot of different metrics that are across a whole bunch of different frameworks. And then we added to this our own research and our own insights from other sources as well. So it was really like taking stock, what is robust, which kinds of measures are robust and common across different frameworks. On which dimensions do we not find much, not a lot of measurements. So to sort of see which are the more mature areas, which are the areas where there's perhaps more disagreement, more conflict, and sort of work with those different frameworks. And then, of course, sort of take a step back, also stay in close touch with the other clusters, in particular C5, the cluster that looks at all the other social dimensions except the one related to own workforce, to make sure we are aligned and to make sure we use consistently words in the same way, etc., etc. Okay, well, we're all good still? Yeah? Okay. All right, so then, again, and I think this is kind of quite to be on the sort of drafting side. I think this part is probably one that I found most exciting, because it was really like, wow, all these big visions. Of course, they are the ones that coming from EU, but also international visions. They are incredibly empowering. The question is, how do you actually create standards that actually reflect those big visions? And then, of course, in a way, how do you write about these standards without being very neutral, very objective? So, these standards, they are just about providing information. And so then it'll be up to us, what do we do with this information? It will be up to the companies how they use this information. So it's kind of constantly juggling between being very inspired by strong visions, but then having to sort of tone down and to sort of create disclosure requirements that are very vision neutral in the sense that we can't sort of say, well, we want you to report on, for instance, the gender wage gap, because we think that could be a good way for you to address the glass ceiling problem. For instance, that is not something that is not the kind of rhetoric we can use in reporting standards. So there is this kind of challenge of how to rephrase in a way that that stays truthful to the type of information we want, but of course tries to match that with strong visions that these international instruments provide us with. And so here you can see a further breakdown. Okay, when we looked at, for instance, working conditions, so we started enumerating different subtopics. Same for equal opportunities, which is, by the way, the standard that I was working on with others in SIG. And then we had a third substandard, which is about other work-related rights, again about collective bargaining, social dialogue, child labor, forced labor, etc. Okay, and then here you can see this exercise of wanting to sort of align with the standards that are being developed under workers in the value chain, and so that's one thing. So then looking at these different frameworks of we were constantly asked to make sure or to actually justify why we are changing or why we are adapting perhaps standards that are used elsewhere, but pretty much every standard that is used elsewhere, which is valid, we also applied. So there's basically trying to push towards a more of an internationalization of standards and going beyond EU, of course. And so that was I think that's really, really important. Okay, and then we got a lot of feedback already from the European Commission, different director generates different questionnaires that were filled out. So, the version that you will now find online is like the, I don't know, 105 version of standards. So it's gone through quite a lot of changes already. And so let me just very briefly tell you about, where are we with these, what's the objective, and to give you a sense of the tone of these standards. So this is the objective of the standard that relates to own workforce, where you can see it's sort of setting out the disclosure requirements for undertakings to report on how they affect their own workforce, both positive and negative impacts with regards to working conditions, equal opportunities, and other work-related rights. The material information disclosed by the undertakings will allow users, so us, to understand developments in relation to the undertakings, material impacts, risks, and opportunities. Okay. And so again, remember double materiality. The idea is that we are providing information not just targeted at investors or the financial community, but really at all stakeholders. So information that can be relevant for employees, for consumers, for affected communities, for governments, for us as researchers, etc., etc. So the draft standard derives from the draft CSRD, stating that the sustainability reporting standards shall specify the information that undertakings are to disclose regarding social factors, including the principal actual or potential adverse impacts on own workforce connected to its own operations. So you'll always see that there's this question about actual versus potential. The time horizon is something that we always want companies to clearly specify in the short run, medium run, long term. We want companies to reflect on the severity of impacts. Are we talking about mild, moderate, or severe consequences of what they're doing? So there's a lot of breaking down of information that these standards are pushing companies to reflect on. Okay, so that's the skeleton. So again, there's essentially under this under the standard on focusing on the own workforce of a company, we have a sort of general standard, and then we have a subtopic on working conditions, equal opportunities, and other work-related rights. And the way to think about these substandards, essentially, these are mainly standards that require performance metrics. Okay, so they're mainly quantitative. They're asking for quantitative information, whereas a lot of qualitative information about strategy, how you implement, etc., they are more in the cross-cutting approach. So they're located in a different part of the CSRD. Okay. Right, and then we can kind of go drill down on each of these. Maybe we can get back to this. Maybe you guys have specific questions on certain types of disclosure requirements, but here you see a set of disclosure requirements as they are drafted. So again, they are not finalized yet because you may push back on the public consultation, but this is the list. So it relates to what are explained policies related to own workforce, the processes, channels via which your workers can actually express concerns. What are the targets that you are using to manage your material impacts on workforce? What are the actions you're taking? How are you mitigating certain risks? Or describe your employees. So that's kind of a novel one. If I look at other frameworks, where here we really want companies to reflect on who are your employees, try to identify various subgroups and how maybe your activities may affect different subgroups differently. So for instance, we will ask for representation of people with disabilities, gender, age. So there's a number of breakdowns that we require, but then we also in these in the notes to these disclosure requirements, we also encourage companies to reflect on other potential minority groups that may be relevant to bring to their attention. Okay, and then of course we also ask them to consider characteristics of non-employees. All right, and then again, this is kind of a further breakdown, this may look like a lot, but keep in mind all of these are really just numbers that we're asking for. I mean, the one that I was working on, equal opportunities, we're asking for the male-female pay gap. We're asking the company to report the CO pay ratio. We're asking them to report on the representation of employment of people with disabilities. We're asking about benefits depending on different contract types. And we're also asking about what happens when there's a violation of equal opportunity rights. What are the processes in place? How many incidents are there, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so it's really quite quantitatively these standards. Okay. So let me just kind of close on just a couple of ideas here, and then I really want to open up the discussion to you and hear what your expectations are, okay, about where we take this. The CSRD and the impact of CSRD on reporting the reporting entities themselves. But as I already previewed, I think the impact will be just beyond the reporting entities. Okay, so sorry. Sorry, my screen is frozen. There we go. Okay. So I think, so this is, and Patricia, you'll remember we had a workshop last week about imprinting, but I think this is a pretty awesome example of imprinting. So we're actually asking companies to really sort of internalize, embody a vision of that is formulated at the EU and global level. And so, if we believe the work by some of our colleagues and Patricia included, I think there's sort of something really interesting here about how this imprinting may be hugely consequential in the long run. So we will have to see whether this is true, but this the fact that we're asking companies to report on all these many different dimensions, this may have huge consequences. Well, there's a kind of subtle cultural element to this, because we're asking companies to really embody a vision, which is much more about beliefs, expectations, quite cultural. But this may very quickly translate into a change in practices. Even just if you think about recruiting, I mean, I know we have quite a few PhDs or master students in the audience. I mean, there will be a lot of work, who will do all of this work? So meaning there may be also changes more practically in terms of how companies will staff themselves. Their whole information gathering strategy will probably change quite a bit. How they manage, I mean, in the end, there is this implicit idea that, okay, unless you measure, you will have difficulty managing well these different factors, these different sort of environmental, social, and governance related factors. So there's a kind of idea that, okay, well, probably in the maybe optimistic or optimistic view might be that these reporting requirements will be quite consequential over time and maybe long lasting. This impact may be quite long lasting, as we are asking for a bit of a cultural change here. Now, of course, when I think some of you here have done research as well, showing that transparency can actually affect change. So we I have a colleague here down the corridor who has research on transparency, improving the gender wage gap, improving inequalities across male and female employees. So there is this idea that this transparency that we are requiring companies to ascribe to, that may be quite consequential. Again, we'll see, right? So there is this question. We actually have now an opportunity, not immediately, but after 2024, 2025, 2026, to actually evaluate this and to actually try to get at this, evaluate the impact of this. I think a little bit more contentious, there is underlying all of this idea that companies do have something to contribute to addressing important societal challenges. I think that the fact that we all face important societal challenges, that's the social imperative. There's a consensus about this, but probably amongst some of people in the audience here, there may be some people who are there's still an open debate about what it is that companies should actually do to affect all of these important societal issues. And so again, we will be able to hopefully evaluate, thanks to the data that will be created and made public, to evaluate what it is that companies are actually doing to address these important societal challenges. So as I said, I think these requirements will have a knock-on effect. So it's not just the large companies, but also SMEs, other companies that are in the value chain will also have to step up and be able to deliver information that perhaps previously they were not collecting systematically. And then there's this big question about these auditors. So I think on the one hand, of course, external auditing makes a lot of sense in terms of enhancing the credibility of information. But as we know, this market is, this is going to be very interesting as well as who will regulate this market or who should be in charge of this market. Should this be a market that is in the hands of governments, or should we leave it up to the market and the private, laissez-faire, and see who are the big players, and we can already predict who they will be, who are going to be sparring with the companies to help them deliver on these reporting requirements. All right, last slide, and then I want to turn it over to you guys. So, with Benedict and Leandro here at HEC, we've done some recent work on blind spots, and I think it is important to note here that the new CSRD that will come into force, actually, think about it. It takes us about 3 years to develop. Okay, so this is really ambitious. Typically, it may take more, but so we're going to develop standards that who knows, by 2024 we may be facing some very serious other societal issues that we haven't accounted for. So basically what I want to point out is that these big instruments, they are quite difficult to move, so they're quite static in some sense, and which means that probably we always want companies to also report voluntarily other pieces of information that speak more to current events, current issues that may not be required by these large frameworks. I mean, think about it now with the refugee crisis. There's nothing, and at the moment, there's nothing that will require companies to report on what they're doing with regards to what are their policies, actions with regards to refugees. Okay, so that means that this will be a blind spot, and then so there is some interesting research that challenges a little bit this idea that if we're going to require a lot of information from companies and we leave very little room for voluntary information disclosure, this may also be counterproductive. So what and I just throw it in the audience as a more of a food for thought is, or a potential concern is that we have created a framework that is very rigid, very extensive, but is there a risk that we will actually crowd out some of the more voluntary disclosures, which are extremely important? I mean, if you think about the refugee crisis, it would, it would be quite good if companies actually report on what they're doing, although they're not required to do this. None of the frameworks, not even the one that is being developed, requires companies to report on this. So there's that interesting balance between voluntary and mandatory. And I just wanted to point out that there are many blind spots still. And how do we deal with that? So with that last thought, I wanted to give us leave some time to let you raise questions or comments. So the idea was really just to kind of help you understand what is going on, where are we in the process, how is it to be sort of behind the screens in part of a cluster, and then what do we expect from all this? And on my slides, there's probably many more things that you have as expectations or predictions. So I'd love to hear more about, if not clarifying questions about where, or ideas of where do you think, what will be the implications of this beyond this, some of the things I've already mentioned. Okay, let me see. Are there questions? Please,
Patricia, maybe.
Sure. This is amazing. I wonder about the probability of success in terms of both implementation and whether you're going to get the compliance that is desired.
Mm.
And I'm wondering, you've taken such a broad approach here, not you, but the committees that put all this together. And if you were a part of the strategy about why to take this very gunshot umbrella approach rather than, say, starting in a more narrow way, getting it implemented, getting buy-in from companies and all the relevant stakeholders. And then once you get it implemented in a fairly successful way, then expanding it. In other words, the strategic thinking behind how to roll this out. Were you a party to that? Because you point out blind spots. I use the word unintended consequences. Apply the lean startup method to it. Get a minimal viable product working and get traction on it, and then start expanding it. And if you could comment on the strategy for rollout. That's the question.
Yeah, well, I wasn't always involved in all the meetings, and probably the important meetings where, in terms of the scoping of the reporting requirements, etc. So I've been quite under the water in this little cluster, but so you're asking me like a big picture question, which I think is a very important one, about why do we start at such an ambitious level, and why do we not have this kind of like trickle up? We start small and then we grow. I think the simple answer is that actually there's already a lot of frameworks out there that are being used that are already quite ambitious. So there's no need for us to tone down. But if we wanted to live up to this principle of double materiality, we have to step up. So it's like to start very small would be, in fact, all the most popularly used frameworks are already quite ambitious. So we couldn't go down, but if we wanted to deliver on this notion of double materiality, we had to step up, I would say. Keep in mind that there is a strategic part to this, that we are going step by step. So first the sector agnostic, and then you will have sector specific standards, and then even entity specific. So there is this graduality, and there's more to come, so to speak. So there is some of that which is obviously very important for the buy-in. I think buy-in is of course an element that is very, it's negotiated. And so this negotiation process is a very long process. I mean, I came in June of 2021, but, Patrick, I don't know if Patrick is on this meeting, but this process is, has been his life work, so it's a very, very long, slow process. So I think we were pretty lucky that back in 2021, stars were pretty aligned. I mean, we have at the EU level, if you look at what is happening on the green, the environmental side, things are very ambitious. So, if you wanted to live up on that ambition, well, the social and the governance needs to step up too. So there's a lot, I think we were some sense also lucky that there's a coincidence of elements in 2021, but also a whole life work behind this of years and years of negotiation. And so I think we are at the stage where we are pressing, and in the end, you have to be also a little bit, we're not pressing too hard either. I mean, it may look like a lot, but it's not, it's if we were to do the match between what we are doing and what the most popular, GRI or SASB is requiring, it's, it's in line with double materiality. That's it. I mean, but yeah, it's a great question. I think, but I remain hopeful that we're going to make it into at least the first application, and then we'll get pushback, I'm sure, and then we'll hopefully have opportunity to adapt. Elaine, are you back without noise? No, we don't hear you.
May I ask Jacqueline maybe while waiting for Elaine? Jacqueline, you have a lot of questions actually, but maybe one.
Oh, right. Yes. Actually, a brief introduction about myself as well. I also work on this topic, and with a lot of people in the GRI and EFRAG.
Okay.
We're trying to adopt and then to create tools and then tech solution, and together with the consulting firm. So I would want to specifically to understand about the reporting, the timeline. I just want to make sure that I understand that correctly. So the first application will be for the financial year of the 2024, right?
No, and then 2023.
Oh, for 2023.
So it will be the reporting done in 2024 about what happened in 2023.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. So it's very soon.
Yes, that's very soon. Right. And then I know that the ISSB already also issued their framework, and the SEC also published the requirement, but that's mainly focusing on climate, right?
Yes.
What do you think about the difference? And then yes, between these the other two major
yeah, but I think the SEC, the recent disclosure requirement is very much aligned. It's also asking about companies in the supply chain to report on CO2 emissions and other more environmental indicators. So I think we are really aligned. There's no conflict. I think we're much aligned. I think I think the EU, as it stands, the draft reporting requirements are just incredibly ambitious because it's the first reporting requirement that requires so much detail. And let me tell you also that I think, because maybe some of you are more, qualitative researchers, but there will be a lot of text. Okay, so we're going to ask a lot of narratives from companies. How are we going to treat this? How do we make those narratives really into even comparable points of information? How do we actually turn those narratives into something that we can make sense of, keeping in mind, but the narratives will be all over the place because the space, as Patricia pointed out, is so vast. And so how will we? So there's also a real kind of question of complexity, and maybe the complexity is somewhat greater with the current version than with some of these other frameworks that you're referencing, Jacqueline.
Yeah, exactly. In terms like a lot of qualitative narratives. And then how we're going to ensure the process, because normally it will requires accounting and then assurance, right, to ensure the quality of the reporting. And this is my opinion that the difference between the European standard and also the SEC. SEC requires that to be in the 10K filing. And also they will need to have the external third party auditing and also assurance, but I have not seen that have been developed by the European standard yet.
Yeah, let me see, because I see so many other questions. Thank you, Jacqueline, for pointing this out. But maybe I want to let some other people speak because we only have.
We have a question from Dane, but he's in a cafe, so I'm not sure if. Can you ask your question, Dane, or should I? Okay, maybe I should. Is there a specific theory of change underlying these activities? Relevance is for whom, for example?
Relevance of reporting. Is it that?
Sorry, you said relevance was one of your guiding principles. It was more about like
information quality. Okay.
Or information quality, or any of those principles. Who's kind of? Do you have an idea of? Are you thinking of a particular user when you're developing this?
So that's a good point. So the users are really very broad. The idea of the users would be that it's really governments, so investors, the financial community, but also employees. Union, you name it. The users are actually it's deliberately very, very broad. The idea is really that this information can be used and will be used. Or the hopes is that it will be used by a very broad community. So the relevance of this is it's more the idea of does this piece of information actually speak to the issue that you're trying to capture? It's more in this way. Not in the way of what you're thinking. Maybe is it relevant to X, Y, Z? Because that's we're deliberately keeping it very open. The idea is that the underlying philosophy of these reporting requirements is that they can be of use at least by a very broad set of stakeholders. I hope that answered your question. Are there other questions still?
Do we have questions from the social business certificate participants, maybe?
Well, we actually have some more time after this talk to discuss. So,
is Fabrizio with us? Yeah, a while ago he was wondering how EU-centric will it be, and can it be adopted or easily scalable internationally? I think you've answered.
Yes, thank you for
that. That's a great question. I think so. There is, as I mentioned, like some of the initial documents that guided our thinking are EU-based, but not only. I mean, we looked at a lot of human rights and more international UN. The more international documents as well, international principles. I think the hopes should be that this is going to be, this will, it'll be like a race to the top, right? So in the sense that these, we will learn from this experience, hopefully we'll have a chance to learn, and then we'll take the best learnings to actually from there also think about the transferability to other regions. But keep in mind, I mean, Fabrizio, I don't know where you are active, which area you're active in, but there's a lot of concerns in emerging economies about these very extensive frameworks and the feasibility, whether they actually are going to favor, do companies in those markets a disfavor because they will not be able to deliver on all of these pieces of information, and they will be penalized perhaps by ESG investors. So there's I think the global dimension that you're hinting at is a very important one. I hope, at least focus here is companies based in Europe. We will learn a lot, but then that will help. I hope that will inform our thinking also about how we go about expanding to the emerging economies in particular, because that's where we will expect to see a lot of change. And I think these frameworks and how they interact with these different contexts is really important. So yeah, I think I think my answer will be is we can learn something from this, but we should be very mindful about these different contexts. In what is the idea of this framework is that none of these dimensions are substitutable. And so this is an issue that I think is important in the sense that, they are, it's not like a company who has a very bad environmental score, but a very good social one would be highly regarded. The idea is that these dimensions are all, complements to each other. But I think this is an issue where we get a lot of pushback from stakeholders in emerging economies, whether that's actually realistic.
Thank you. Great work, by the way.
Thanks for your comments. Is there anything else? Anyone else who wants to?
I have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
Like it's also like something related to Euro centric, because as we already know, like EU taxonomy like originated from the EU. And my question is more about, for example, for CSRD, it's more like emphasizing the double materiality. And also for example, ISSB and other parts like TCFD, they're more, I would say, investor approach perspective.
Yes.
And for example, for other parts of the world, it's kind of related to the last question.
Yes.
For other parts of the world, they're adapting a lot of the like ISB, SSB, like more like investor perspective.
Yeah.
So how would they be able to like adapt more like going to the double materiality? And also, as you said before, the emerging economies, and how do you measure the controversies between, for example, the social factors? Because it should be like, I would say, measured differently, because I have talked to a lot of people in emerging economies, and they are still trying to see the correlation between ESG metrics or social factors with stock price. So it's still in the very, very beginning. So my question would be more like how do you see maybe like those who are in the investor perspective, like transition to double materiality, or how do you push that kind of the transition?
That's another great question. Well, I think this notion of double materiality, perhaps in emerging economies, it's even more pertinent, more relevant. This is where we see the confluence of crises, of environmental, take the example of climate refugees, or you name it. It's a lot of climate challenges are socially unjust, and they are happening in emerging economies. So the impact materiality of companies, it seems even more important for us to understand. But you're absolutely right. How do we actually shift? How do we how do we actually change that? How do we convince stakeholders that is important information to consider, and that it can be influential to behavioral change? Well, this is where I said, like, I hope we can actually show something thanks to the experimentation at the EU level, that we will be able to show change on important societal issues, and that will hopefully be inspirational also to other regions in the world. And then I really do think that we will have to kind of step up on training and making resources available in emerging economies to make companies and not just raise awareness, but make the adoption of those reporting requirements that reflect double materiality also less scary, more feasible, more doable by them. And so I think there's an important role by a government or large banks, Asian Development Bank, to actually play a role in filling that gap, because there's going to be a gap, and it will be the question is who will pick up the bill. And I think this is a real public good, and so I would say that governments will have to play a role there.
Thank you. Sorry, a really quick follow-up question. So, as like from your perspective, do you expecting more like market scheme to push this kind of formation or like improvement, or you can also see activism plays a role like within the formation?
So I think if you take the European example, it's not a market push. I think it's a really government push. It's a much broader set of stakeholders who are pressing for this. It's not a market-led initiative in the sense of it's not a private sector-led initiative. So I think you will need a push from other stakeholders. Okay, Elisabeth, should we call it a?
Well, it's good that we recorded the questions, because you have comments and other questions, I must say, but it is now 1 p.m. So maybe we have to leave all our guests.
Right, so I wanted to thank you. Thanks for the discussion. I'm going to take a look at all the notes you left behind in the discussion board with lots of interest. And if any afterthoughts you might have, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'll be interested to continue the conversation. Have a very good afternoon, and thanks again for joining. Take care. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.